What's up, everyone? This is Political Ideas and Thoughts. And this episode is, in some ways, it might be very fundamental for your understanding of why things are the way they why things seem to happen so much in the way that they do. Because see, one of the interesting things that seems to be not understood or ignored is this idea of popularity, in a sense. Not that it's ignored, but what it is missed is, well, there's several problems with this idea. There's these ideas that people have, that we have these inalienable rights that must not be violated. We cannot violate these rights. But the thing that these people don't understand is that this is not how things work. We don't have inalienable rights. We just don't. Like, if you think we do, that's fine. But you're not right. You're wrong, because that's not how this works. None of this works this way. I mean, if you think you have some kind of inalienable right to free speech, I dare you to go to some place like China or Iran and talk about, how Allah is dumb, or that, try and draw Muhammad or something. You're going to be killed. This idea of inalienable rights is stupid. But people believe in it. People believe in this idea. Oh, we should have, these things. And I'm not saying that they're wrong necessarily, but the problem is they think of it as an inalienable right. And that itself is the problem here. But because people don't seem to understand that this doesn't exist, you run into some problems. And I want to make a video eventually about judgment itself, and how it blinds you to reality. Because it's something that I've been noticing. And yes, I've just made some judgments, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I have completely stopped making judgments. I think judgments can be useful, but the problem is that they also can be blinding to you and to others around you and things like this. And I'm going to be making this episode eventually, or this video eventually. So, because people have this idea of inalienable rights, it's really interesting, actually, because most people's idea of control and power itself is really very simplified. It's one of the things I've been noticing lately. Like, even somebody like me who usually thinks about these things, I actually didn't realize until pretty recently that power itself, control itself, is not this universal thing where you're like, for instance, like this idea that you're controlling yourself, and all your desires and things like this, or that the president is controlling everything. When in reality, it's not really this. It's not really that simple, because especially in the government and the economy and things like this, because there's so many players here. There's so many people who have their own self-agendas involved. Not to mention, institution agendas, like, for instance, like a special interest group, or whatever that group might be. And I'm not a really big fan of those types of groups, because they often heed progress more than they increase it. But they can be useful, but they're also it's also not as useful sometimes, many times even. So, power and control, it's not really this universal thing, and most people tend to think of power in this very stage red sprout dynamics type of way, like, oh, I'm gonna conquer everybody and now I have all this power, or something along these lines. But what it really is, especially in the constitutional republics that we have, like the United States and places like this, power is more evenly spread out, and even in countries like where there's a dictatorship, the power isn't necessarily just in this one person's hand. What it is, and it is like this too. Don't get me wrong. There is this dictatorship, but it's actually more complicated than this, because you see the problem here is that this person, even if this person is completely in control of everything, this person has people that they're controlling, right? And these people are they have their own self agendas. They have their own human error, and so they're going to be doing things differently than he wants things to be done for the most part. Even if you do have this dictatorship, right? The problem is that people think that, okay, so he's a dictatorship, so he's basically beholden to no one or nothing and things like this. But what does this person have? He has values, he has ideas from his society and things like this that he's probably going to be a part of. So it's not like he's just completely all powerful and things like this. There's going to be a sort of mastery level there that's going to be not as masterful. So power is more complicated than just like, oh, I have this power now. And this is one of the problems why, this is one of the reasons why when presidents get into power, when presidents try and get into power, and they do all this campaigning, they say, oh, I'm going to do all these things for the economy and things like this. And I'm just sitting there going, okay, I mean, you can try, and don't get me wrong, they can and do, but the problem is that people have a very oversimplified idea of what power is, and especially in these cases. Because if you're living in a constitutional republic, which we're living in the United States, and some other places as well, your power is going to be limited by the government, which people get, right? But the problem is that the power is, because there are these different interests at work here. And it even goes beyond people. It goes into how the mind is in itself. But because we have these things, these different people involved here, the power is more separated a little bit, which is interesting and fine and everything. But the interesting problem that happens, because a lot of people are like sitting there with this idea of unconstitutional, and they're like, well, this is unconstitutional. And I'm like, okay, I get it. But what you don't understand is that these people in power, they're doing what the popular thing, if it's not popular, for instance, I'll give you an example. And this doesn't really work as well in the federal level, but in the state level, the way that it seems to work more accurately is that if it's a popular position or idea, and it does work kind of like this in the federal level, but it's a little bit different, and it's more like based on their ideas, their popular ideas, not of the people necessarily, although that definitely happens as well, but also of the people in charge. You have the laws are going to be changed. And the Constitution, it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't matter, because we have laws in place right now that violate the Constitution. And if we had these inalienable rights, this would not be happening, right? I mean, come on. I mean, if you think about this idea of rights in the first place, like there's a bit that George Carlin did that I think is really pretty accurate, honestly, because if you look at what rights are, not really what they are, but how often they're violated, you'd be sitting there laughing at yourself, sitting there like, really, people believe in this idea of rights? Like, you have these rights and they shouldn't be violated? Well, if they shouldn't be violated if they're rights, and why are they violated so damn often? This is really one of the most blinding things that people have. And so when they have this idea, the problem is that when these rights are violated, which they are, they're always going to be violated, really, for at least probably for the next 100 years, 200 years. Less and less, yes, but it's still going to be happening. It's going to keep happening. Why? Why is this happening? Because of the popularity. And see, one of the problems here is that this idea we have that power itself is a unified thing. But it's really not a unified thing. But it actually goes deeper than this, because power itself and the popular ideas themselves. So one of the problems, actually, so this is how I'm going to try and explain this, because it is a bit complicated, right? So one of the problems themselves is that, so say you create a new constitutional republic that has the same law, the same Bill of Rights, and the same kind of constitution as we had, right? At least the first 10 Bill of Rights or whatever. Okay. So, the problem with these ideas, and they're good ideas, don't get me wrong, is that the popular or the people in power, they're not beholden to this stuff. Not really. So I'll give an example even. In 1798, there was four laws, I think, that were passed in Congress, called the Alien Sedition Acts and Sedition Acts. And it was about, basically, it was a foreigner problem, I guess. There was this war between the United States and France, or going to be, or something along those lines. And so they tried to pass these laws, and they did pass these laws, and they violated the Constitution, and they violated free speech. I'm sorry, but that goes against the Constitution, but they still violated it. And for 2 years, because the laws only lasted for like 2 years, and I think one of them was like for 3 years. And one of them's actually still around, but it's not as bad as the other ones. But because people in power are not beholden to something called the Constitution, what they're beholden to is themselves. And this is one of the things that libertarians have pointed out, in the sense that actually is correct. And one of the problems with government is that the government itself, it's not beholden to anybody. See, one of the problems with power is, and one of the problems with government is, like I said, government is useful and it's necessary. But the problem with government is that you have power in the first place. And when you're powerful, especially to the level that they were powerful and still are powerful today, you're not beholden to anyone. Not really. I mean, sure you have laws that don't get passed, and you have things that don't get passed, and you have people who want to try and charge you and do all these things. But for the most part, you're not really beholden to anybody, in a sense. Sure, the public might try and charge you with something. But the problem is that because these people are in power, it doesn't matter to them. They're still not really beholden to anybody, because of how power works. power protects power. This is one of the interesting things, and this goes back to the ideas of survival. If you want to know more about survival, you can see a 2-part series from actualize.org called Understanding Survival. And it goes into much more than just this idea of physical survival. It goes into what's called self-agenda. That because power itself is in the hands of these powerful people, and also in like rich people's hands and stuff like that, the power is going to be disproportional to the people. And this is why, these ideas about freedom, the idea about power, like, oh, we need power to stop people, the powerless, from being, violated. We need to do all these things. But the problem is power itself. Power is not necessarily all evil, but it's not all good either. For the most part, what power is kind of like a car. It can drive you places, but it can also kill you and kill other people. And for the most part, it's actually worse than this, because the power, because we have people, and pretty much everybody has a self-agenda. Even when you go into power with good intentions, and even if you still have good intentions and you're in power, the problem is the power itself. Is that people are also in power who are still for their own self-agenda. And so you can't just make laws for and expect them to be passed. And if you have a dictatorship, you have the same problem, but in a different way. You can make these laws and pass these laws, but the problem is, in this case, that there's still a self-agenda here. Most people think of, things like language in the government as, just like, they don't think of them as like living systems with their own sort of like structure, and they don't want things to be changed. Like the government and language itself is living systems, are living systems, and they are not, they don't change easily because it evolves slowly, because it's not something that changes. It can't really be changed as much as people want to change some of these things. And there's many reasons for this. I don't really go too deeply into this, but one of the problems with this is that even if you do have these constitutions, they still can be violated. They still will be violated, and probably will be for a long time until something eventually snaps. Because the problem isn't power itself. The problem isn't really even government itself. The problem is, and don't get me wrong, it is also government, but it's more about the mind itself, and how the mind works, and how self-agenda works. And when you're in government, your corruption and your self-agenda is going to be more obvious because you have more power. And it's really interesting, because a lot of people think that, if we just get rid of government, we would be free and we'd be able to do all these things. But that's not how this works, because, like I said, everybody has a self-agenda. And if we just get rid of government, what's going to happen? All these corporations, they have way more money than everybody else. And so they're going to just hire all kinds of security forces, and they're going to take over everything. And they can rule everything. And they don't have to be beholden to anyone, because they're corporations. And libertarians have this idea that, no, but we can buy them out with the dollar. Yeah, but if you are threatened at gunpoint to only work with this corporation, because these people they have way more money than you do, than everybody else. Even if everybody else would have collectively taken all of their money together and tried to fight these corporations. The problem is that they have way more resources and power and money than we do. And so that wouldn't really work. Not to mention that most people cannot even afford to do that anyways, because most people have these 9-to-5 jobs. They have to survive in some way. And so they can't just stop working like this. Because one of the problems that would happen is they say, okay, so we're just going to fire you, and so we're going to just hire robots. We're going to just hire people from Mexico and all these foreign countries. You're not going to get anything. And they can do that because they have this power. Freedom doesn't stop this from happening. Freedom literally means that you can literally do whatever you want. That means you can kill somebody. That means you can do whatever the fuck you want. There's no laws in place to stop this from happening. And so power itself. Power is in some ways oversimplified, but also the oversimplification is in some ways correct. Because self-agenda is involved here. And that's what's missing from most people's understanding, is that most people have a very simplified idea about things in general. They're just like, oh, well, if we I don't know, like, get universal basic income in, and we can just give people $1,000 a month, this would fix all these problems. And sure, it might fix some of the problems, but the problem itself isn't money. I mean, it is part of the problem, don't get me wrong. The poverty is a problem. And there have been people who have said that because of poverty itself, people have less intelligence, not because they're inferior, but because poverty makes them, I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. Like, if you don't have enough food to get through the week, and you don't have enough money to buy the food for the next week, and you can barely pay rent, you're not going to be thinking about your education, your intelligence. And so you're going to be, dealing with things in a very basic, minimalistic sort of view. And that can and does work for some people, but only by choice. And so power in government is like, well, the same as the mind itself. It's almost a double-edged sword. Because the more that you try and enable power, the more that you try and increase it, the more problems will creep up. But the more that you try to decrease it, the more problems creep up. So it's not really about decreasing or increasing the power. It's about understanding why this happens. Understanding the mind itself. And most people are just concerned about power. Like the surface level, like, oh, do this, do that. That'll fix all these problems. But that's not really how this works. Like, most of these things that that people suggest have been done and can be helpful, but they're only like a very minimalistic, very simplified form of how these things work. Power itself, government itself, the mind itself, all these things are at play here. And there is no simple solution. And that's what most people don't want to hear. They're just like, no, we want this this way, right here. We want more conservative values. We want more democratic values. Don't tell us it's not a simple solution. This is inaccurate. No, we can't have this. But that's the way it is. I'm sorry if you want to believe differently, that's fine. But you can just delude yourself all you want. But it's just the way it is. And That's why we're in the situation we're in the first place. I mean, look around you. Why do you think so many people are angry against these people, the police, and all these other people? These people are just like, defund the police, and then everybody else is like, no, don't defund the police, and nobody sees like the nuances here because everybody just thinks fucking simplified, and it's very stupid. That's why I'm really getting sick of politics, because most of politics is just like simplified solutions and simplified ideas. I might go more into police reform as well. One of the interesting points that I pointed out to somebody the other day, or maybe it was like a month ago or something, about police reform that also relates to power as well, because it goes into a survival and self-agenda, is that if you have, say somebody, because some people, what they want to do, and I don't necessarily disagree with the idea to some extent, but one of the problems is that what some people want to do is they want to defund, they want to remove the police from certain things like nonviolent crimes and things like this, and just put social workers and things out there instead. But one of the problems with this idea is that what if this guy that they're trying to work with, these people, draws a gun on them? What are they supposed to do? Call the police to deal with the problem that the police were there to deal with in the first place? Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong and that we shouldn't necessarily try and like fix these problems, but the problem isn't the police, the problem isn't these people, the problem is the mind itself. And most people are just focused on police. The police are the bad people. All cops are bastards. This stupid idea, and I'm just like really sick of it. I'm just like, really? Like, I mean, sure, there are problems. There are people like who have been really dealt with harshly by the cops, but the problem isn't the cops. The problem is more complicated. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the cops are, all great. I'm not going to go that far either, because there are situations like George Floyd and things like this that happen. So it's not about the cops being great or good or not great. It's about what is the actual cause of this. I don't fucking care about your ideas of what racism is or what you think it is. Racism. I don't care about that. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking specifics. I'm talking about what the mind is doing in this situation, because that's what we're really talking about here. This has nothing to do with racism, for the most part. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm sure there's racism involved, but racism is just a simplified understanding in the first place, because what do you need in order for racism to exist? The mind. The mind is the problem here. It has nothing to do with racism. It has nothing to do with this idea of defunding the police. It's about the mind. And they can't see this because they're so locked in their own ideas and beliefs about things anyways. And this is what really pisses me off, because these people are just so unwilling to understand these things properly. And I get it. I really do, but I can only take it to a certain level, because you look at, if you look at what your mind is like in these situations, like think about what you would be like if you were a cop in some of these situations. Like some of them, and the problem here too is that, like, we can sit here and look at things hindsight 2020, right? But the problem here is that survival is not like a good example that I like to think of, and what that's regards to this is that if you're being charged by a bear, or if you see a bear even, and it's coming, it looks like it might be coming near you or something like this, what are you going to do? You're not going to sit there and think reasonably like, oh, maybe the bear is just like walking around. You're going to be like, oh my God, there's a fucking bear there. And you might, if you have a gun, I don't know, pull the damn gun out and shoot the bear. I don't know what you might do. Who knows what you're going to do? Your problem here is the mind thinks it knows what it's going to do in situations like this. But, like, philosophically thinking about, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to shoot the bear. No. Is completely different than what you would actually do in the situation, possibly. Because the problem here is self-agenda and survival. Self-agenda is not a bad thing, it's not a good thing, it's just a thing that exists. Most people have a very simplified idea, like, these cops are just bad. These government people are bad. And I've gone through moments like this. But you have to be more aware of, like, why is this happening? What is the root cause, the root problem, the root reason why this is happening? And since I'm pretty much on the subject at this point, this goes back to judgment in the first place. What does judgment actually do? It blinds you to what you're judging. Right? So if somebody told you that, like, a certain food is really bad because they tasted it, it was really horrible, and so you would then, like, if for some reason you would have taken that to heart and started judging people who ate that food, and then you actually ate that food yourself, and you went, wow, that person was actually wrong, I like this food. Because before that you wouldn't have seen that, you thought that the food was horrible and that, this person was just wrong. I mean, most people probably wouldn't necessarily do this, but I'm giving you a very overt example to show you why judgment is blinding. It blinds you to actual reality itself. So I'm more concerned with, at this point, and I've done this before, don't get me wrong, about judgments, but I'm more concerned about observational awareness. Observational, what is actually the cause of this? What is actually causing this? But the problem is that most people think, okay, so in the sense of the government or the cops, it's this problem. Yes, what's causing that? Like the root cause of this. And so when it comes to cops, for instance, what is causing them to do what they're doing? Some people's response is racism. I'm talking specifics here. I'm not talking about your ideas of what the cause is. Racism. Oh, racism this, racism that. I'm talking about actual causes here. Like survival. Like, okay, so some cop kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 47 seconds, or 46 seconds, or whatever it was. Why did this actually happen? I'm talking specifically. What was going through his mind? What was the actual purpose for this? Actual purpose. And for cases like that, that's a little bit more overt, and so there's no real need for that in those cases, as much need anyways. But for less overt cases, where there could easily be some survival at stake or something like this. See, the problem here is the mind. Because if you're in a reactive situation where somebody has a gun, or even when the person is running from you and the person you might see a gun, you don't know what to do. Like you're not gonna be sitting there going, oh, what should I do? Should I just not do anything? Is he gonna pull the gun out? That's not how this works. That's not how survival works. That's not how the mind works. But most people are not or will not see this because they're unwilling to or are unaware of this. And this is the main problem here, is because there aren't, when we think of government, we don't really think of things as minds doing these things. We think, oh, somebody's just passing a law. But there's not like a somebody there's not like a government entity that's doing these things. What is made out of government entities? Minds, people. What are the people's motivations? Why are they doing this? Actually doing this. I'm not talking about racism because that just doesn't really solve the problem here. I'm talking specifics, like, oh, this person did this because of blank, like specifics. So, for instance, if a cop were to shoot somebody 6 or 7 times, the usual response from like Black Lives Matter activists would be, oh, this is racism. But why was it racism? Like actual, oh, this person was racist because he saw a black person and okay, why? Because that doesn't really necessarily help us as much. Racism has been overused, honestly, in the past 7-8 years. Literally everything has been considered to be racist by some of these people, and even the ideas of racism itself, right? Before this, even the ideas of racism itself is very it doesn't really give us a whole lot of information. Oh yeah, he's racist. That means he has an idea about certain people. Like if you were to actually describe racism in this situation, that's one thing. But the problem here is the idea of racism in the first place. Because racism, number one, race doesn't exist. It really doesn't exist. What it really is like in genetics, race doesn't exist. It's more about like physical attributes rather than race. That's number one. Number two, what racism actually is what's called tribalism, which is basically like, so I'll give you an example, right? So say you take somebody who's white, because a lot of people won't seem to think that all white people are racist or most white people or whatever. So you take this person who's white, maybe he's lived in a middle class or rich neighborhood, and he hasn't really seen any black people. And so what he's actually seen of black people is, I don't know, like what's on TV, maybe the rap songs that he listens, maybe he's heard. And so because of these ideas that he's had about these people, maybe that's what he takes to be what a black person is. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying this is why this is happening. So this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about racism. This is what happens when you don't actually have a fuller understanding of what black people can actually be. There's this guy who back in the day went to a bunch of Klan members as a black person, because he's a black person, right? So he went to all these Klan members and he talked to them, and he actually was very, he's a very educated person. You can tell he's very articulate, right? So he goes up to these Klan people, and they're like really surprised, like, wow, what? Because they've heard all these things about black people, and they've seen possibly things about black people. And so when they actually see a black person, when they actually hear him talking, and they actually get to actually know this person, a lot of these Klan members left the Klan because of this person. And so it's not about racism. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm saying that these people aren't racist, but it's more about ignorance rather than actual. I think that helps understand the situation more accurately than racism, because racism has been this idea that has too much emotion that's been attached to it. And so I like to think of it more as ignorance or as tribalism, because this white person has only really seen black people in like rap videos and like stereotypical ideas of what black people might be, like, I don't know, holding guns and things like this. And so he sees this and he goes, oh my God, these people are, whatever he would think about what a black person is. I'm not saying that this is what black people are like. I'm just giving you examples of why this is happening. Now, if you want to point to this and say, "Oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have this in television and things like this," sure, I guess I can kind of agree. But the problem is itself tribalism. It's not racism. It's racism in the sense that there is a idea about race that this person has that is inaccurate, or maybe only partly true, or whatever. It'd be like if, like a black person, for instance, or to see a white person like 50 years ago and see how insane that person was against his own kind and go, oh my God, all white people are racist. And so from that point on, he would have seen all these white people doing all these horrible things to black people, and then he would have kept this in his mind, and he didn't really know all that many white people from nowadays. Like, for instance, like say he, for some reason, traveled in some kind of time capsule from like 1966 to today. He would have seen white people, and he would have gone, oh my God, these people are so racist and all these things. But things are way different now, at least mostly different. And so it wouldn't be in the same league and the same level of understanding that those people back in like the 40s and 50s and 60s had. And so this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about going into the actuality of the situation. And most people don't do this. They're just like, oh, racism, police are bad. And I'm just like, I mean, sure, yeah, there are bad things that police have done, but I'm looking into why this is happening. And most people don't do that. They're just like automatically judging. I've done that though, so I'm not like criticizing so much as pointing this out, because it took me some time, it took me some awareness to really see the problem with this level of understanding. And one example of this is racism itself, even. It's like the most obvious example, honestly, because racism in this way is literally what happens when you have judgments, and then when you actually see somebody like Daryl Davis, that's the guy I'm talking about, who went, he literally went to Klan members and got them to see black people completely differently, and so they left the Klan because of him. And so you see how racism itself is more about ignorance. So really what judgments do is really what I've been seeing over the past month or so. Not even really month, 2 weeks, is that judgment itself is ignorance. Judgment, if it doesn't create ignorance, it keeps it in place. And that's why I'm more about finding out the root understanding or reason why this is happening. So this is a very long video, but I hope this gets things across to you in a way that you may not have understood before. This is Political Ideas and Thoughts, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.